Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first live interview on our library's online library service. Today is the World Book Day, and we thought we'll have a special treat for you, the interview with a real author. So, hello. I've invited Stephanie Wrobel, who is the author of The Recovery of Rose Gold, sensationally good thriller I've read recently, and I absolutely loved it. So I just jumped on the opportunity to be able to talk to Stephanie about her book. So Stephanie, you originally from behind the pond, and and you arrived to London a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so I've been here 4 years total now, but yeah, I'm originally from Chicago, and moved here for my husband to go to business school at London Business School, and we thought it was just going to be like a 2-year jaunt, and then we loved it so much that we decided to stay.
Fantastic. So this is your debut novel.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you could start our chat with reading from
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a teaser.
So I will start from the very beginning, because that seems like as good a place as any. And so the first chapter is from Patty's point of view, and it starts with the day of her release. My daughter didn't have to testify against me. She chose to. It's Rose Gold's fault I went to prison, but she's not the only one to blame. If we're pointing fingers, mine are aimed at the prosecutor and his overactive imagination, the gullible jury, and the bloodthirsty reporters. They all clamored for justice. What they wanted was a story. Get out your popcorn, because boy did they write one. Once upon a time, they said, a wicked mother gave birth to a daughter. The daughter appeared to be very sick and had all sorts of things wrong with her. She had a feeding tube, her hair fell out in clumps, and she was so weak she needed a wheelchair to get around. For 18 years, no doctor could figure out what was wrong with her. Then along came 2 police officers to save the daughter. Lo and behold, the girl was perfectly healthy. The evil mother was the sick one. The prosecutor told everyone the mother had been poisoning her daughter for years. It was the mother's fault the girl couldn't stop vomiting, that she suffered from malnutrition. Aggravated child abuse, he called it. The mother had to be punished. After she was arrested, the press swooped in like vultures, eager to capitalize on a family being ripped apart. Their headlines screamed for the blood of poisonous Patty, a 50-something master of manipulation. All the mother's friends fell for the lies. High horses were marched all over the land. Every lawyer, cop, and neighbor was sure they were the girl's savior. They put the mother in prison and threw away the key. Justice was served, and most of them lived happily ever after. The end. But where were the lawyers while the mother was scrubbing the girl's vomit out of the carpet for the 1000th time? Where were the cops while the mother pored over medical textbooks every night? Where were the neighbors when the little girl cried out for her mother before sunrise? Riddle me this. If I spent almost 2 decades abusing my daughter, why did she offer to pick me up today?
Exciting. Da, da, da. So for those of our listeners who might not know your book, could you just sum it up in a couple sentences what it is about?
Sure. So it's about a mother and daughter named Patty and Rose Gold Watts. And the book begins, as you might have guessed, with the mother getting out of prison. She's just served 5 years for child abuse. She gets out, she has nowhere to go, and she begs her now adult daughter, Rose Gold, to take her in. And to the shock of everyone in town, Rose Gold says yes. But the question is why, and the story unfurls from there.
Yeah, it's a fascinating part because normally when you read the books, the thrillers, it's usually the story of how the perpetrator was caught and then imprisoned. That's the part of the main story. But your book, it's not about that. Your book starts after the loads of other books finish. It starts from like, what happened after. So what was the reason why you've chosen that particular part? What happened after rather than writing a story about her mother abusing the child?
Well, my impetus for wanting to write the story was to get inside the head of someone with Munchausen by proxy. And in case there's any viewers not familiar with it's an illness where a caregiver fakes or induces sickness in the person they're caring for, which is often a child, in order to get love or attention from doctors and nurses. And so my best friend, who actually is an elementary school psychologist, was the first person to introduce this illness to me. She has experience with the syndrome through her work. And when she told me about it, I was immediately fascinated and horrified. And so I went and did all my own research. And I was really shocked to discover that the perpetrators are usually women and often mothers. And so, we think of the mother child bond as sacred, but it's not in these cases. And I wanted to explore why that was. And so I really felt like the starting point had to be, this woman sort of getting out of prison and starting new. Like, you're telling the reader up front, like, she has done this. This is what she is guilty of. This is like what she's facing. And I think in order to really roam around in her head and figure out, does she know that she's lying, or does she honestly think she's doing what's best for her kid? Like, you kind of have to give that information to the reader to start with.
I've read somewhere in one of your interviews that with you that you're more fascinated by why done it rather than who done it,
Yeah.
which I thought was very interesting, because the whole book is basically the story of unraveling what actually happened and what the actual truth is. Because obviously, even though Patty was imprisoned, she claims she's innocent.
Yeah.
And I think it's what I find particularly fascinating is it's for those of the readers or listeners that I might not know, this book is told in two voices. So it's a Patty's voice and it's a Rose Gold's voice, which I thought it was a fascinating way to write it down. And what I find particularly fascinating is when I was reading Patty's parts, even though I knew she was imprisoned for this horrible crime, I could not stop myself thinking about, well, maybe there is something behind it. Maybe she's not really, this horrible mother. Maybe she's maybe not innocent, but there might be some grains of truth behind her story that she's telling. Was that is that what you wanted to look like?
That wasn't actually my intention, and I've heard that reaction a lot, and I think it's interesting. I just assumed when I wrote it that people would know, like, well, she's been convicted of this crime, she has served her time, so people will know, like, she actually did this. But the fact that people are so unsure based on what Patty says, I think is a testament to people who have this illness and their ability to convince and manipulate and lie really well. And so I'm actually glad in retrospect that is a reaction that people have, because I think it means like Patty is succeeding as a character, because yeah. I think people with this syndrome would do what the rest of us do, which is like sort of emphasize the great things about us, the great things we're doing, and just kind of like shove conveniently to the side like the not so great traits about us that we would prefer people didn't think about.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's just basically your great writing that made Patty such a convincing character, because her voice is so interesting, and she's we get in her head and she's chilly. He's this controlling person, but on the other hand, you sort of have this thoughts about her past. Especially there's some parts of her past that come out in a book that her not so great childhood herself, and you almost made us sympathize with her as well, basically on the grounds of what happened to her as well. Was that what was the reason behind you adding those horrible bits of her childhood? Is just basically to explain why she was the way she was, or?
Partly. I mean, that is true. And in all my research, the one thing that I found that's almost like universally true is people with Munchausen by proxy typically have their own childhood histories of abuse and neglect. And so what they were lacking as children and didn't get from their own parents or the people in their lives, they're now seeking as adults. So that was part of it. But I also think I'm really interested. I'm just like not interested in black and white portrayals of people where it's like this person's good and this person's bad, because I think that's not true to real life. And so I do think part of my goal with writing this character of Patty was, if I can make the reader relate to her for a page, a paragraph, even a sentence, then I think that I've done my job. I'm not saying, you're going to like her. I know I've written 2 unlikable characters and I'm fine with that. but to be able to just say for a second, like, okay, wait, I understand where she's coming from in this part of the book. Like that was the goal.
You said you wrote a book about two unlikable characters. Why? Why did it have to be unlikable?
Well, they didn't have to be unlikable, but I think, certainly because the book started with Patty and knowing what she had to do. I mean, in order to have this syndrome, you've had to abuse a child. And so, of course, like that's no matter what else she does, you've abused a child. Like you're going to be an unlikable
Yeah.
character. Um, and that's okay with me. Personally, I like to read unlikable characters as long as a character fascinates me. I am not particularly concerned about whether they're likable or not. I know there's lots of readers who they'll kind of ding a book if the character wasn't likable, and that's fair. But you know what? Like you don't have to please every single reader. You just have to write the story that
No, I liked it a lot.
Depends. But yeah, that didn't deter me. I mean, of course, you want people to have an enjoyable reading experience, but for me, like diving down these sort of dark alleyways of the mind is more interesting than writing a likable character.
But Rose Gold, she's so tricky. I don't want to sort of I can't give away too much. I think afterwards we just have to have a little chat about sort of like, we're going to do like a double thing. And now for people who read the book, these are the spoilers bits. Because there's so many things I would like to ask you about whys and hows and whatnot. But, I'll try to, try keep it professional. For people who might not read the book, tell me about Rose Gold. And she's very odd character. I loved it about her that she's not just this sweet innocent person, it looks.
Yes.
That's been abused.
Yeah, the hardest part of writing the book was getting her voice and her characterization right and her emotional development right. I think in earlier drafts, she would either be too naive for too long, or she would be too sort of rebellious and hardened too early. And then also just taking out of her voice, the pop culture references, the colloquialisms that I have, and just realizing like, wait a second, she was isolated for 16 years. Like she has not grown up with the same wealth of knowledge that those of us out and about in the world have. And so I think with her, you start out feeling a lot of pity for her, understandably. I think that's probably, I would assume, I obviously haven't talked to everyone here, but I would assume that's a pretty universal start. And then, without going into too much of where she turns as a character, I just, there's a lot of stories about victims and they can go a few ways, but I wasn't really interested in her just kind of feeling like a victim. If that, you know what I mean, without saying too. I wanted her to like claim her own story and adjust in her own way, whether that was in a healthy or unhealthy way. I wanted her to take control because Addie has controlled her entire life. And so for her to just kind of fall back into that narrative of the good girl who does what's expected of her just wasn't as interesting.
I found her particularly fascinating because of her unpreparedness for the world outside is after she's been released from prison. And this is the other fascinating bit about your book, because normally you write books, normally when people write books about situations like this, then the bad character is closed in the prison, is off the scene, and then no one mentions what happens to that child afterwards. So I thought it was particularly fascinating the way you've done it, because as I said, she's completely unprepared for certain things, and on the other hand, she's very clever in a way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to be put in the same situation as her, I would have fallen flat on my face. I mean, she does manage to, hold down a job, to rent an apartment, to feed herself, which, as somebody who has such a complicated history with food, like that's no small thing. And I think, she does have the neighbor, Mrs. Stone, to help her in those initial months and years to acclimate to what the real world is like. But yeah, she definitely has an uphill battle ahead of her, like things that we just take for granted, learning to drive, like all of these things are just, they're not a given for her.
I found particularly fascinating her social skills. She is lacking a lot in that department in sometimes, and I think that creates this I don't know, gap between herself and the society around her that I thought particularly fascinating. She does not know about boundaries. She does not know much about sort of how to behave with her friends.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I think, who can say if you haven't actually lived through that situation? Obviously, there'd be plenty of different reactions and a range. So I'm certainly not saying if you've grown up in social isolation, this is the way that you would react to everything. But I do think it's realistic that, the things that you say, like not understanding boundaries, not understanding social cues, not picking up on sarcasm, like knowing sarcasm from sincerity, those are all just more obstacles in her way. And if you've only had really one relationship to understand the entire world in an unhealthy relationship at that, it's just going to be a lot harder for her to understand, like, wait a second, inviting myself on a trip with people that I barely know is like not
I wanted to avoid this bit because I thought it was a bit of a spoiler, but that was a fascinating bit. It was like, what are you doing?
exactly. I think as the reader, we all know, like, oh no, you've gone too far, you've ruined it, like back up, back up, back up. But hopefully if I've done my job right, you can also understand, like, well, she has no clue that this
Yeah.
is she's gone too far until she can like tell from their reactions, like, oh no, that wasn't a cool thing to do. If you think about it, like on its face, if she were a child, which in a lot of sense, like her social development is that of
Yeah.
a child, she doesn't have the same filter and everything that you would normally get as you become an adolescent and adult. She just thinks like, this is my family, of course I want to do this thing.
That's true. And so this book is book about relationships as well. So it's a bond between mother and daughter that I found fascinating in it. And again, I can't go too many spoilers afterwards. But that bond between mother and daughter was it the main thing you want to discover in this book? Because I thought it really worked spot on.
I mean, I think, yeah, when your two main characters are a mother and daughter and their, you know, entire lives are bound up in each other, I think, of course, there's going to be a lot of mother daughter analysis or, bonding. But I don't think, I mean, there's certainly a special relationship between a mother and daughter that you don't find in a lot of other relationships. But I think the parent child bond in general is a really interesting one to explore. I was just writing an essay about this yesterday. There's something about our parents and specifically our mothers where we let them get away with more. We their opinions matter so much more to us, and it's interesting to think about that, why that is and where it comes from.
I also found that a very interesting part of your book was about those close communities. So Dedwick, the small community that Patty and Rose Gold are part of. Um, that was another fascinating bit about the story. The close community of people who first feel very sorry for Patty and Rose Gold and are very helpful. The Patty is treated like someone really amazing. And then after the horrible things come out to the light, they are really shunned. I mean, Patty's shunned, but also Rose Gold is she does not treat community as her own community. She's outsider to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the smallness of the community certainly is just another way to make Patty's release from prison even more difficult, because if she lived in a bit bigger of a town or a city, it'd be easier to start over. She could find a new group of people who didn't know anything about her past and she could start fresh. But being the writer, you have to put a lot of obstacles in the way. And so what does Patty want more than anything? It's approval and to be adored. And so to go back into this community that thinks that she's absolutely horrible is tough for her, as it would be on any of us, but especially for her. And then as far as Rose Gold goes, I think it's weird because like the community wants to be her protector, but then they also were so intrigued and involved in her mother's trial and takedown that I think she feels a certain sense of not betrayal, but just like, I don't really trust your intentions. Some of this is not you just being altruistic and wanting to save me. Some of it is just a nosiness and just interfering where you're not wanted sort of thing. So she's just leery of them. She doesn't really trust them totally, but she also doesn't have anyone else to fall back on.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking. Like you would think that she would just move away somewhere, but she doesn't really know anyone else. She
Yeah.
can't just go and start a new life somewhere else until she, I think, learned how to do certain things, how to live her own life, which was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, she is a little bit trapped. If you think about, it's already overwhelming. She has to learn how to feed herself, how to drive, how to hold down a job, these things we've talked about. And like, if she already, at least she knows in Deadwick where the grocery store is, like where I would go to do these things. Whereas if she picks a new place, she's completely starting from scratch. So I think even though she's not fond of Deadwick, it's also like, well, she's got a few things that she at least knows what to expect. And certainly, and it's not as much on the page in the book, but Mrs. Stone's help in getting her on her feet has been really instrumental for her. So I think that's one of the things that's really holding her back from going somewhere else.
And the other thing about Rose Gold I wanted to ask you about is teeth. So she due to have abuse, she's got a horrible teeth basically, and obviously American healthcare system being as it is does not allow her to deal with that straight away. So why, what was behind this decision? Why is this to make her, was it a particular reason you might have this fascination with her teeth so vivid in the book? At least to me it was.
Yeah, I think so. Part of it is, again, comes from the research, which is that a lot of people who have Munchausen by proxy will put some sort of feeding issues on their child. So whether it's forcing them to get a feeding tube or whatever, and with malnutrition, your teeth are one of the things that can be affected if it's really severe. And so that was part of it, was born of the research, and then part of it was just, for some reason, our teeth are just like so visceral to us, maybe because they're so exposed and visible. It's one of the first things we see in someone when we meet them. And that reaction has been very similar. It's sort of like cringe that you have when you're talking about the teeth. And that's really what I wanted, because I think it's just really demonstrative of how she feels about herself. She's ashamed about them. And then as the book goes on, you can see through how she relates to her teeth, like how she's changing as a character, which I think is interesting.
I think that was very clever. I really like that. Okay. So you said in your research before that, the length of research you've done. Can you tell us in more detail about how did you actually started with the book? How did you get on to publish it?
Oh, sure. So I originally wrote this book for my thesis for graduate school. So I did an MFA program in the US in fiction writing, and that was a 2.5 year program. And I knew going into the program that I wanted to write my first novel to the extent possible and use that as my thesis. And so that's what I did. And I finished the program in November, December of 2018. And a few professors told me, I think that you should send this out to agents and see what the response is. So I did that and signed with my agent, who is here in the UK. And then she took it out a couple months later, and things just went really quickly. I mean, honestly, I was prepared. Like, everything you read is like, it's going to take forever to do this and this and this. But I just honestly got lucky. And so it went faster than I expected, to be
So
sure.
how fast was it from the actual, okay, this is my finished book, to there's my book on the shelf?
So that part took a lot longer, but basically it took me a month to get my agent. And then when she sent it out, it took about a week or 10 days to get the US, UK, Canada offers finalized. And then from there, it was a year. From the time of the book deals to the time it hit shelves was a year, which is pretty standard in the publishing industry. I had no idea that it took so long. But yeah, to create all of the marketing buzz and to get the title and cover and edits and publicity and distribution all in order, it takes a long time. Like, I have so much appreciation for every book on every shelf now, because it takes an army of people and so much energy and creativity. It's really amazing.
That's right. But I've noticed the American title is different.
Yes, it's Darling Rose Gold in the US and Canada.
Do you know why? Why was it changed?
It's really interesting watching the teams. I think it just comes down to what they feel is best for their market. Like, nobody in the UK or US could really tell me, like, this scientifically is why we need to have this title. So it's quite interesting, but they both like the name Rose Gold. It was very distinctive, but yeah, they never really said specifically why they had to have that, that those words, but I think it just comes down to what they feel is best for their market. And same with the cover.
Cover is lovely. I really like it. It's just those little scissors in here.
Creepy with the hair.
It goes back.
That tiny little rat tail on the back is nice.
I really like that. Okay, so you said it took a year from when you sort of presented your manuscript to actually being on a shelf. And how long did it take you to write this?
So I wrote a first draft in the summer of 2017, and then I ended up scrapping the whole thing except for these two characters, Patty and Rose Gold. And then this draft, and of course there were edits to it, but basically what became the final book, I wrote over the course of the year of 2018. So I was still in grad school at that point and taking classes, so I was kind of writing the first part of it alongside that. And then once I hit summer and class was over, I really expedited and was writing faster. So, but about a year, I would say.
Fantastic. And what sort of research do you have to do? Like, what sort of books you have to read to get into the sort of more idea what the Munchausen by proxy syndrome is and about the characters? Do you have any sort of like a extended list of books about bibliographical research, what you've done in particular, what you've read?
Yeah, so the most helpful book that I read was a memoir by Julie Gregory called Sickened. I think it's like Sickened, the memoir of a Munchausen by proxy childhood or something like that. It's kind of a mouthful, but Julie was the victim of her mother's abuse. Her mother had Munchausen by proxy, and so she tells her story, and that was really helpful. I read a bunch of news articles that were obviously much shorter, with a bunch of different cases. And then I also read a medical textbook that was specifically about this kind of syndrome. And basically I used all of that stuff to form the general profiles that I was mentioning earlier of perpetrator and victim, and just saying like, okay, what are the few character traits that seem to be present in this syndrome across the board? And then I was able to take those things and flesh out my own characters and turn them into Patty and Rose Gold, and not just, case studies basically.
So you said you scraped the whole first draft of the books. So what was it about? If you want to say.
It was originally going to be Patty and Rose Gold, like both ending up in prison at the same time. And so like going through this experience together, and it just didn't work. And I was really fortunate to have a professor who offered to read the first 100 pages of it. And so he read it and he was like, this really reads more like a case study of Munchausen by proxy than it does a story about two people. And he was very nice and gentle about it. But I realized coming out of the office, I was like, oh crap, I have to start over, don't I? But I'm really glad that I did, because this is much better than what I
had. So how many drafts did you end up with in the end? Just two?
Yeah, just as far as like a full rewrite, it was just two, but
that's not too bad. That's what I've heard. How many edits? Some people love edits, apparently. How edited was that? Did you get like a lot of people saying, oh no, it's not gonna work in here, I've got no idea and stuff?
It's tough. Most of the editing I would say was done in my grad school program with my thesis advisor. So by the time it went to the agent and editor phase, there were edits, but the edits with my agent took about a week to turn around, and the ones with my editor took about 6 weeks. So those weren't super substantial, but yeah, it was just reworking it over and over throughout that year, that second year of grad school.
I find this fascinating, the whole process of, I think at some point, if I was ever to write a book, I would just got sick of it at the end of that.
It is funny that you say that, because there is, for me, like the longer I'm working on a project, I do start to like get a little sick of it. So for me, it's like trying to get it out as good as possible, sort of as quickly as possible, before I'm like, oh, I want to move on to the next thing. So, yeah.
So are you working on the next thing now?
I am. So I'm working on my second novel, which will also be suspense. It's about a wellness center that's based on an island off of Maine. And the center is exhibiting some cult-like tendencies. So yeah, if there's one thing I've learned describing this book, it's that people are universally fascinated by cults. But it's 3 points of view, the leader, a member, and the member's sister who wants to bring her home.
Fantastic. That sounds great. I'm looking forward to reading it. How is it going, writing your second book?
It's been tougher than the first one. There's been one character in particular who's really stymied me, and that didn't happen with the first one. There was never really a point when I just felt so stuck and didn't know where to go. But the difference is this time, and I have to remind myself of this, I have editors who can help me, so I have to be like, oh yeah, wait, there's professionals who this is literally their job. So that's been really nice. Last week I had a nice hour-long chat with them, and that helped loosen some stuff up. I think, as most writers are, you tend to be sort of a solitary creature and you're very happy to work alone. But, you forget how just talking to someone about it for half an hour, whatever, can really help and just bring so many new ideas to the table. So hopefully that'll get me on the right track again.
Are you still working at the moment on your second novel? Some people say that during this interesting times that we're living through, they finding that they just cannot concentrate. How is it writing going in for you now these days?
I mean, I for sure have some days where I'm just overwhelmed by the outside world, but to be honest, I actually find it relieving to be able to work on it because you're just leaving this world and going into another one. And I find, just with my personality type, if I have things that I'm supposed to be doing, a to-do list that I'm working on, getting this chapter done, whatever, that feels to me less anxiety provoking than if it was just like every day feels the same, sitting in the flat, reading the news. So I actually like it. And my goal, hopefully, is to get this book done and by the time, have most of the work done by the time we can go out again. So then when we can go out again, I can enjoy myself and I'm not, strapped to my computer trying to get this book done.
So do you work on a schedule? Because I've heard from some authors that have got a very strict sort of like routines. They've got very strict, some of them have got spreadsheets about things going on. Do you have everything plotted straight away? Whereas to some other authors just right at the beginning and they're thinking, oh, I don't know what's going to happen later. Let's see what the characters will tell me. How is your writing process?
I am definitely a spreadsheet person. I'm more of a plotter. But that said, so I will try to have a sentence summary for each chapter of what's going to happen. And the way that I do it is just, I start with whatever premise and start really macro. Where do I want the book to start? Where do I want it to end? And then I just keep kind of drilling down and getting more granular. Once I have a sentence summary of each chapter, I feel like I'm ready to write a first draft. But that's really, I think, more of a way to stop myself from feeling overwhelmed, to be honest. Like if I look back at original outlines, like even from this book I'm working on now, from the first to second draft, so much of the plot has changed. But what makes it, I just think having some sort of guideline makes the idea of writing 80 or 90,000 words less daunting. Even if I don't follow them, like who cares? It's still, I'm never going to be sitting at my computer going, I don't know what comes next. And if I know what comes next, then I can keep going. So I think for me, it's almost like this security blanket to just help me make progress.
Fantastic. I'm fascinated about how authors work and how this sort of like writing process looks like. I don't know if I could have a, tenacity to actually be able to sit down every day and just try to work on something. I think there's a special breed, the authors are a special breed that just basically fascinates me so much. So the more things that glean out of it is brilliant.
That's where tracking your progress. For me, I keep a different spreadsheet that's like how many words I've written each day, because I think if you can see the word count going up, it feels making progress versus just, God, I still have so much to do.
Yeah, you just like feel you've achieved something. That's true. Yeah. Fascinating. Great, fantastic. So, did you actually see your book in the bookshops before we were shut down? Because it was public. Oops, it's upside down. It was published quite recently before the lockdown. So, have you seen it in the bookshops yet yourself?
Yes. So on March 5th, it came out, and I went into a Waterstones that day and was able to see it and take my photo with it with like a cheesy thumbs up. So that was that was incredible, and I'm really looking forward to being able to see it again once we are allowed to leave our homes again.
Yay! So I just wanted to recommend this book to all our readers and listeners. It's a really good thriller. It's fascinating. It's quick to read. It's fast paced. I don't know what else can I say. Say go and read it. Go and read it. You should read it. um, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for an amazing chat we had today. I really enjoyed that. And please remember about us, about the second novel. If you, hopefully by the time you wrote the second novel, everything's going to be reopened and you can come to the actual library and meet actual people in the library as well. That would be fascinating. Oh, and do you have any, if people are wanting to get in touch with you or wanted to check your website, do you have a website? Do you have a Twitter handle and stuff?
Yes, so my website is stephaniewrobel.com, and then my Instagram handle is also Stephanie Wrobel, not Stephanie Handle. Just my name.
Thank you very much for speaking to me today. And thank you very much for all of you to listen to the story, and hopefully you will go and borrow the book, read the book, buy the book if you have to. One more time, thank you very much for your guest. Normally I ask people to do a lot of clapping, so I'll just do it myself now.
I'll clap too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.